All right, hello everyone once again, and welcome to Truth Noir. I am joined by now kind of semi-regular guest on the show, once again with Steve Mashni. Thanks for being on again.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
We are this time talking about, anytime Steve's on, we always talk about biblical stuff, and so this time is no different. We are doing a segment on the Nephilim, otherwise known as fallen angels. There is a great amount of historical record, at least in ancient literature and creation stories the world over, about a race of giants that was, spawned from the coupling of human women with star people or angels. The word or term varies, based on what group of stories you're reading, but the basic story itself is pretty universal. And there's been kind of new stuff coming to light recently with regard to that. And so we just thought it would be a good time to bring it up and kind of introduce it to anyone who's otherwise unfamiliar. So, of course, we're familiar with the story of David and Goliath. That's probably one of the most common stories that's familiar to Christianity and Judaism, about a dude fighting a giant. No mystery there. But these stories have taken place throughout history, and so we're going to shed a little bit more light on them. Steve, why don't you go ahead and start us off and give us some context here?
Okay. If you want to, again, my interest in it, my only interest in it is because it is in the Bible.
Sure.
The Bible does talk about this, and there's a very interesting scripture. We've talked several times on this program about end-time prophecies and about what it's going to be like at the end of the world before Jesus comes back. And there's a very specific prophecy by Jesus. He says that in the last days, it will be as in the days of Noah. And there's, so we look back at the days of Noah and what was unique about that time in Noah. A lot of people say that that's just a reference to the fact that, Noah got into the ark. People were just going about their business, getting married and buying and selling, And,
Sure.
And there's other things as well that, I think are interesting about the time of Noah.
Yeah, because there were also giants walking around
Yes.
and interacting with people, and they told these stories like they told any other story about what was going on in their lives, and I think that's what's most remarkable about it.
The very first reference to that, there are many references in the Bible to the Nephilim. Now, what the Nephilim means, it comes from the Hebrew word nephal, which means fallen, that they fell, the fallen ones. In Hebrew, whenever you have I am at the end of a word, it means it's a plural. It's like, it makes that word plural. Well, the way the letter S, it makes it plural in English.
Sure.
In Hebrew, I am at the end makes it plural.
Okay.
And so Nephilim, the fallen ones, more than one.
Sure.
And so there is a verse in the Bible that is actually it's very controversial because there's disagreement about what it actually means. But let me just read it and then we'll explain a little bit. It says, this is in Genesis chapter 6. This is in the time of Noah. Okay? It says, now it came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth and daughters were born to them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, and they were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves of all they chose. What's interesting here, the sons of God saw the daughters of men. Now, I'll just tell you there's two basic theories from this. One theory is, there was a godly line. The godly line was the children of Seth. Seth, Cain was murdered Abel was murdered by Cain. Seth kind of became the righteous line, whereas Cain was like the ungodly line.
Right.
So a lot of people believe that when it says sons of God, they're talking about the sons of Seth saw the daughters of Cain. And that, that's what a lot of people believe.
Okay.
In fact, that was what the Catholic Church from the 4th century began to teach that.
Okay.
But there's, if you continue reading, it seems like that is inconsistent with the story to say that that's what happened. Because it says here in verse 4, it says, "And there were giants on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and bore children to them. These were the mighty men who were of old, men of renown." And so here, you see, this is where it gets, it's inconsistent that it would just be the sons of Seth and the daughters of Cain, because their children were giants, to where there was something else going on here.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's interesting that you mentioned at the date range after which the church started
going with the Seth theory.
Yeah, because correct me if I'm wrong, but this was around also the time of the councils of Nicaea, where there were certain scriptures that were considered to be canon up until that point, which were then edited out and became known as the Apocrypha and not official scripture.
Right.
And it was, and the one of these was the Book of Enoch, which it goes into very much more detail about these references to giants and the fallen angels. And I meant to bring a copy of it because there were some passages that I wanted to go over also, but unfortunately I lost it because I was in a bag on the bus and I walked out of the bus without it, unfortunately.
Yeah, the Book of Enoch is in the Bible. There's 3 books that are mentioned, and they're mentioned in a historic, like as if it's referring to them in a historical sense, like referring to them as historically valuable. One of them is the Book of Enoch.
Right.
One is the Book of Jasher, and there's another book. I can't remember what it is. But these books are not considered scripture, but they are considered to have some value, especially linguistically.
They were considered important enough to reference.
Right? Yeah.
But for some reason, just didn't quite make the cut. But these, and in the Book of Enoch specifically, like I said, these were very detailed references to the interactions with the angels, and they even listed them by name.
Right. Yes.
And
Azalel was one of them.
Yeah, Azazel, Jekalel, or the very exotic sounding names.
Yeah. Written something down there.
But as it turned out, each of them taught mankind a different skill, and there's a lot of that story that's told that is kind of evident in our own recent history, and by recent I mean the last few thousand years, fossil record, where you have civilization just kind of appearing out of nowhere. You have what they're looking for, this missing link, that suggests that humanity came from being like a hunter-gatherer society and having some transitional period, but they haven't found that in all of their digging. And what you have is very complex writing and poetic structure. You have very well developed agriculture and buildings and language that kind of just appears out of nowhere. And it would seem that this is sort of a good explanation for that, especially since it's written in a historical context.
Yes. I just wanted to say one thing about this term "sons of God," when it says that the sons of God saw the daughters of men. That if you look in the Bible, in the New Testament, there's the adoption, where somebody believes in Jesus and becomes a son of God. It says, to all who believe, he gave the power to be the sons of God. But in the Old Testament, they don't refer to individual people, humans, as sons of God. But in the book of Job, it does refer to angels as the sons of God.
Okay.
To where this seems consistent that this is speaking, even in the scripture, of a literal, and that the angels actually did fall and come down.
Right, yeah.
And, I'm just trying, because I know that this is between the two theories about it being Seth, the children of Seth and children of Cain, and it being, the other theory is that there was a supernatural, that these angels actually, like the story described in the Book of Enoch, about this one angel who, decided that, they saw the daughters of man, saw that they were beautiful, and that he gathered like 200 angels and said, let's go and, have these relations with these women.
Even in the Book of Enoch, it's kind of like this, they're kind of like goading each other into it. None of them will do it individually. But they say, well, if we all do it, God can't be mad at all of us, can he?
Yes.
Like there's that kind of, it's not said exactly that way, but that is pretty much how it went.
That's, I actually wrote it down. Okay, let me see if I can have this here. It says, come, because one of the angels was called Azalel, and one of them was called Simjaza, who was like one of the leaders.
Right.
And he says, I fear, this is from the Book of Enoch, I fear you will not indeed agree to do this deed, and I alone will have to pay the penalty of this great sin. So they all answered, let us swear an oath and bind ourselves by mutual imprecations not to abandon this plan.
Right,
and so that, now this is in the Book of Enoch, this isn't in the Bible. But
I think that was actually like page 1 or 2.
Oh,
that was one of the first acts that is described, and it really is a kind of catalog of those entities and the aftermath that kind of in a little bit different way led up to the wrath of the flood.
The flood, yeah.
And
there's one verb, adjective that is used to describe Noah. It says that he was, when you go back to the Hebrew word, he was pure in all his generation. That we've always considered that to mean that he was, morally upright. And it does say that as well, that he was morally upright. But that word pure, if you go back to the Hebrew, it actually, that word, whenever else it's used in the Bible, it's always referring to a physical purity, that not a moral, but a physical, that he didn't have the corrupted DNA in him.
Okay, so he was not descended from
the
interaction of women and
the corruption that happened in the human race, as a result of this interaction, because apparently it had gone. It is believed that, if you look at the names of there is Seth, Lamech, Methuselah, and Noah, but there's one whose name is Jared, and if what his name literally means is come down. And they believe that, according to like the Book of Enoch, that it was in his day that this coming down, that the angels came down.
Okay.
So that's one of the theories about this, and that they had. And let me just say, because a lot of people say, how can an angel have kids? Because Jesus does say in one place, he says that, because what happened, some people came to Jesus and said, when a man dies, you know, if a woman had like more than one husband during her lifetime, whose wife will she be in heaven? And then Jesus said that no man will be like the angels which do not marry, you know. So a lot of people say, well, you see, the angels do not cannot marry.
Yeah, and so it had to be this sort of children of Cain versus children of Seth example, like from before. I can see where that mix-up.
Yeah, that's what a lot of people say.
Or that interpretation could occur for sure.
But we do have examples in the Bible of angels coming and taking on human form, that they do materialize, and the Bible even says, be sure to be kind to strangers, because thus have many entertained angels unaware. So that the angels do manifest as humans. And in the Bible, there's many stories of that happen, like when they went to Sodom and Gomorrah. There was clearly two men, that went to get Lot and his family out, and so that there is, and it shows many times that angels they eat with people, and they, to where they do have the ability to do physical things. And so, my personal belief is that this was angels that did come down, based on the evidence that they were angels that did come down, have sex with women, and give birth to these giants, and that was one of the reasons why the flood happened, because these people were very violent as well. That was the number one reason why the flood happened. It says it's because of the violence. Right. So, it just, but that verse has caused a lot of controversy, and a lot of people still believe that it's a Seth and Cain thing. But I believe, based on their children, that this had to be something different. It couldn't have just been human,
Yeah, because, I mean, and like we were saying before, even if it were human and human, like, intercourse that was going on that gave rise to this kind of offshoot lineage, they wouldn't be giants. Like, that's kind of an odd thing to have enter into the story. And also the fact that this story of, like we were saying earlier, this is across cultures and across time, that this specific story device, this is ubiquitous between all of them. So,
in the Greek, this is, this is in the Old Testament. If I could just tell one other story about these Nephilim, because this is what's interesting, is it says the giants on the earth in those days, that the result of the intercourse, between the angels and the women, there were giants on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the women. So it was in those days and after. Well, when was the afterward? The Bible does describe that too, and that is in the book of Numbers. It talks about when Moses was bringing the people from Egypt, the Israelites, they're bringing them out of Egypt and bringing them to the land. And if you remember, they sent 12 spies to go spy out the land before they went in,
Right.
And the spies came back and scared the people to where they didn't want to go in, and they ended up wandering for 40 years instead of going in. And what was it that these 10 spies said? 2 of them said, we can go, let's go get it, we can take it. But 10 of them said, no, there's no way, because there's giants in the land. They says they're giant. We look like grasshoppers in front of them.
Right.
And so that there were giants, and there's, and the most famous giant is the story of which you showed, Goliath. From the. But there's several different, and it very specifically says in the Bible that they were the Nephilim, that these are Nephilim. That means that they are from the,
from that
between
coupling,
women and men. But where did that happen? How could that have happened when the only people saved on the ark were 8 people? There were 8 people.
Yeah, supposedly not of that bloodline.
Not of that bloodline, unless, they say, a lot of people say, well, one of the wives of one of the sons may have had the bloodline in her or something like that. Or the other explanation is that there was another falling of angels.
Yeah.
That there were other angels that fell. And, there just the names, I just want to say the names of the giants in the Bible. There's one of them is called the Emim. They're called the Emim, the Rephaim, the Anakim, and the Gibborim. Now, Gibborim, if you know Spanish, it means like the giant, But there's also one in Arabic, because I know Arabic. The word for giants in Arabic is Amalekah. Amalekah. Does that remind you of anything from the Bible there? The Amalekites.
Oh, okay.
They were also a race of giants.
Okay.
And so that there were this group, and, Goliath was a giant, but he also had 4 brothers, and they were also giants. And they had 6 fingers and 6 toes, and that was one of the distinguishing marks of the Nephilim, was the 6 fingers and the 6 toes.
Right, and now I've heard you were saying earlier that something out of Native American culture, that the kind of the old greeting of the raised hand.
Well, it was Buffalo Bill Cody, in his diary. He wrote about this because he had lots of encounters with the Indians, and almost there's the Navajo, the Paiute, the Chaco, the Sioux, all of them have this story about these cities of giants, these giants that existed and had been wiped out. Somehow they had been wiped out. And quite often, the story even says that they were wiped out by a flood because they didn't believe in God. They specifically say that. To where, the story, you figure, they're on the other side of the world, and yet it's the same story, about these. And but he said, this was interesting. One of the things, let me just say some of the things that the Indians said about these giants, because what happened is that when Buffalo Bill went there, they brought out this bone. It was a thigh bone, a human thigh bone, but it was humongous, And he said, it's like, and the person, whoever's thigh bone this was, would have had to be like 15 feet tall. And he said, where did this come from? And this is what the Indians said. They says that these giants, they could outrun a buffalo. They could even carry it in one hand.
Oh, wow.
That's what they said about these Indians. And the Indians went on to say that the giants did not believe in the Great Spirit, and he caused great rain to come down, and the water kept rising higher and higher, and it drove them to the hills, and then to the mountains, and finally to the mountaintops. But even the mountaintops were submerged, so that all the giant men were drowned. The Sioux Indians say that the earth was originally peopled by giants who were like 3 times the size of modern men. They too say that the giants denied the belief in the Creator, and they were wiped out by the flood, So that, but the interesting thing, there's one thing that in the Buffalo Bill, in his writings, is that he said, like when the Indians say how, that the reason they did that was to see the hand, that it had 5 fingers, not 6.
Right.
Which, again, going back to Goliath, the Goliath had the 6 fingers and 6 toes. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And just and for reference too, that it seems that historically that's how a lot of greetings came about, were to make sure you were okay.
Yeah.
Like that. Yeah. Like this. Okay, we have the same number of fingers. Awesome. And that the handshake, the extending of the sword hand, was to make sure that you were both unarmed.
Correct, yes.
And that you more than likely were shaking hands with the hand that you favored, that would be your sword arm.
Right.
And so...
I've heard about that too, that when you're saying, I don't have a sword.
Right. That's the gist of it, basically.
Yeah. Well, what happened? The reason I learned that is because there was a guy that I put on my hand like that, and then he put out his hand, and I was a jerk. I shouldn't have done this, but I just put my hand back.
Oh,
and
yeah,
then when I did that, he explained to me what that means, and I said, "Oh, okay, sorry."
Yeah,
he was
my
offended.
bad.
But there's another. I just would like to. Just explain that the Nephilim that were in the Holy Land were wiped out by Joshua, and eventually by some of them continued, but David wiped out some of them, but they remained, for several hundred years after, they entered the land. But there's a very, this is all in the Old Testament. But I wanted to say something about the New Testament. What about in the New Testament? Because there are two passages in the New Testament that talk about these angels. And they're in one of the books is the Book of Jude. Now, the Book of Jude is just one chapter. And Jude is one of the brothers of Jesus. He was one of his, the brother through Mary and Joseph, but not. Of course not.
Of divine.
Not 100% brother, right. But he was a brother. And Jude talks about these angels, about what happened to them, because he was comparing them to the punishment of the unrighteous. And it says about them, if I could just, it says that what's interesting is when you go back to the Greek about what he says, because it leads us into what the Greeks also believed. It says, these angels, this is Jude chapter, there's only one chapter in Jude, but verse 6 it says, and he's talking about the people who disobeyed God, who were punished. It says, and the angels who did not keep their proper domain, but left their own abode. Now, when you say that proper domain, I don't know the Greek word. I can't say it. It's a huge Greek word. But it means actually, it's used often to speak about the body. That they left their place and their, dignity, It says that they left their proper domain. He has reserved in everlasting chains under darkness for the judgment of the great day. To where it's talking about that they're being held right now in chains. Those angels that fell, not the Nephilim themselves, the offspring, but the angels
that did
fell.
this.
And
that was also from the Book of Enoch.
Yeah.
That it was describing the making of the prison specifically for them because of what they did was a pretty big affront to God,
which they knew it was.
Right.
But what's interesting about it, and Peter also talks about this too. And I'm not going to look for the verse, but it says the exact same thing, that these angels are held in chains. But the thing about it is that the word that is used here, whenever they talk about hell in the Bible, they use the word Gehenna, which is the Hebrew word, Jehannam in Arabic, and Sheol. That's speaking about the land underneath the pit. But this is the only time in the Bible here where it uses the word, when it talks about this place, this prison, it's called Tartarus.
Okay.
Tartarus is the only time in the Bible that this is used. This is where the angels are being held, is in Tartarus. The place where you'll find that word Tartarus, you'll not find it in the Bible again.
Yeah, that's Greek mythology,
But in
right?
Greek mythology, where the Titans, you can almost say that the Titans, because they were supposedly the sons of God and women, this race, that they were punished and they were sent to Tartarus. To where you see that this word Tartarus, this story was in the human psyche, and you find it.
Who was it? Jung, I think, we called it the collective subconscious. That there's these sort of, I think he used it to refer to imagery that occurs commonly in dreams throughout all of humanity, but these stories are I think enter into that also, because they're so,
consistent.
I mean, it's kind of like once you read one and are familiar with one, you start being able to predict what will happen when you start hearing little bits of all of the other ones. And so,
yeah. So this is, I really believe, that the story of the Titans, even though it may be, the Greeks described it in a different way. They said gods came down, but it's still, who were the two famous giants who were born out of the, when the gods came down in the Greek mythology, were Apollo and Hercules. Those were the two giants that, was it Apollo? I think it is.
Yeah, my Greek mythology is a little rusty, but yeah, I mean that's one of the and they occur at about the same point in the story. It's shortly after creation,
Right.
a few generations in,
Right.
that these things start going awry.
Right.
And as it turns out, these are not just the stuff of old stories. As we come along, into the realms that go like beyond faith. Obviously, a person of faith will have no problem seeing these things as a historical document from this book. But for the skeptics out there, it turns out that there is actually now like a pretty legitimate fossil record of these cities destroyed by the wrath of God.
Sodom and Gomorrah,
Babylon. They found these places
Yes.
now. And, with buildings exactly as were described in, whatever ancient story you like. They've said a thing was there, and then people took shovels and dug holes there, and they found it.
Well, what happened was a lot like what happened with this story is that a lot of people said, this happened after St. Augustine had the city of God, city of man, that they tended to allegorize a lot of things, say, oh, this is just an allegory, didn't really happen. But then they went down and they found out, wait a minute, there was this city here. There's physical evidence that this did happen. And this story,
it looks like it's been obliterated.
Yeah. And this story is probably one of the greatest evidence, because everywhere in the world, especially in the U.S., there's so much in the U.S., in the Ohio Valley, they found tons and tons of these giants, skeletons and stuff,
Yeah, and it's created a lot of controversy, and it's become this, unfortunately relegated to, we'll talk about this guy in a little bit.
Okay.
But these are things that have actually happened. People have dug up skeletons that look like this, and if you look at the size proportion,
it's like the Buffalo Bill Cody. Look at the size of that thigh.
Yeah, I think if all three of those guys stood on each other's shoulders, they might be as tall as that fellow they're digging up there, and so pictures of these fossil digs eventually leak out. And the results of them is suppressed. And I'd kind of like to know why. I've heard that a lot of these are being kept in the archives of the Smithsonian, that only very, very few people are allowed access to and to study, and that when they have done DNA testing, like, dug into the marrow of these bones and tested what DNA they're able to find, that it doesn't match human DNA almost at all. Like, not even by half.
Yeah.
And, that's kind of weird.
Well, that's because, 23 of the chromosomes have to be from the mother and 23 from the father.
Right.
Well, they might have the 23.
Half of them came from somewhere else.
Yeah. Well, that's...
And so there's a few of these, and even the old famous paintings by the master artists of the Renaissance show the old famous one of David holding Goliath's head, and it's like it's hard for him to lift because it's so massive.
And if you look in all of the, even in the ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics, it was clear that some of those pharaohs, they were much larger than the other. And it's not just a thing of, because of his position, but there's an actual, and also in Babylon, they do the same thing when they're kings. You look at them, they're quite often, they're bigger than, and what does the Bible say? That these were the men of renown. These were the famous men.
Right. Yeah.
And there's a very famous story in the Bible about, in the Book of Esther, and that book is very relevant in terms of the archaeology, because that was a city that they said that was an allegory that didn't really happen. But then they found the name of the king in one of the Persian palaces. They found the name of the king Ahasuerus, proving that he was an actual king that really did exist. But the bad guy in that, because in the Jews have a holiday called Purim, which is they celebrate how Esther saved the Jewish people. And there was a bad guy named Haman. Well, Haman is called the Agagite. Haman the Agagite. Well, Agagite goes back to Agag, who was one of the kings of the Amalekites.
Okay.
Who was one of the giants. And so that he, you actually can see that his lineage continued. The guy name is Haman, and they celebrate every year the deliverance from Haman.
Yeah, it's a lot of obscure detail that is difficult to root out, but I think it leads to a better understanding of what we're kind of coming to find is entering the realms of like actual history as determined through what is accepted as scientific method and real life tangible proof. Just like the legendary lost city of Troy, surely that couldn't have been real. Well, they followed clues from the Iliad and the Odyssey, and then they found it. And the same thing is going on with stories or pieces of history written down from all over the world. Whatever geographic area is being talked about, they're finding all of this stuff now, and it's kind of a cool time to be observing it and
to be able to, because now we have the ability to actually look at this and and to say, wait a minute, this is consistent with what was written and stuff, but these skeletons, they're
it's way out.
But it's consistent with the story that it looks like, and it's around the same time period and the same type of a situation. There's these mighty people who are very violent. They're quite often, they said cannibalism came from these people. They learned cannibalism from them. The Indians said that. And then you find these skeletons and stuff, and you just got to go, wait a minute. Maybe there's, we allegorize because we don't understand it, and
which would have been, fair enough. I mean, I'm as skeptical as anyone else, but probably more so. but that's kind of hard to argue with.
Yeah,
there's giant skeletons in the ground that people are digging up, and they're dating back thousands of years. So like I'm kind of done arguing the point. It's like, all right, let's accept this as part of our legitimate fossil record and start asking some more questions about, where these things came from.
And, this is just, it's so interesting, if you look at the, let's say something crazy, okay? Something that is possible, that they're saying that there are actual physical structures that came around that survived the flood of Noah. Okay, now I believe the flood happened. Maybe a lot of people don't believe it. I believe there's a lot of evidence that it did happen, but there's actually structures that pre-existed the flood. The flood. If you were to try and take it from the biblical time period, it was like 1,600 years after Adam. Like about 400 years before Abraham. Or about 4,400 years ago,
Yeah, well within the time frame of when some of these monumental, I think the ziggurats of Ur were about that old. The pyramids certainly are that old.
Well, in the Bible, it talks about them in building, these towers, and the pyramids, that these pre-existed the flood, that they were built before the flood, and even now, the perfection of the way they were built, they didn't just put rocks on top of each other. They were they put it at exactly the right angle, astronomically, and the
Sure.
dimensions of it, are consistent with the circumference of the earth, to where so this
Like
amazingly
just these
intelligent people.
very obscure measurements and
Yes.
dimensions that point to very specific places whether they're on Earth or lining up to point to specific stars or whatever it is. It's past the realms of coincidence anymore. I know we had a piece of news that came up recently that I know you wanted to talk about. We'll see if we can't maybe edit it into a little bit earlier in the episode. But
Okay.
this is a thing that you shared with me that is a fairly recent occurrence.
Yeah.
And I'll let you go with it.
I just by accident, I was in Nevada, visiting family there, and I went to bed and left YouTube on. And in the morning, I woke up and looked at my YouTube, and I saw this video of this kid right here. This kid's name is Natan, is Hebrew for Nathan. And this kid is in Israel, and he's this rabbi with him. And the video is on YouTube. If you want to, you just look it up on YouTube. I'm not making any of this up or anything. This is there. I looked at it. I listened to the video. It's in Hebrew, but they have English translation.
Subtitles.
And they also have his whole speech translated into English if you want to look at it. And what happened with this kid, this kid is 15 years old, and at the last year, September 11th of last year, there was a big thing in the evangelical community, about these blood moons, the 4 blood moons that they happened on the times of the Jewish feasts of Sukkot and Passover.
And you were saying this happened 2 years in a row where the blood moons occurred on
those
same
holidays,
feast
on the
days.
Sukkot and Passover. That's only happened like 3 times in the past 500 years.
Oh, wow.
It happened in 1948 when Israel became a nation. It happened in 1967 when Jerusalem was taken back. And then it happened also in 1492, which is also the year that Columbus, and...
Oh, yeah, and now this was also... that same year was when a lot of the Jews were
kicked out of Spain.
Yes.
Yeah. And so this is, to where that when these blood moons happen at the same time as the feast, and I'm not saying I believe in this, but it's a strange coincidence.
It is, which I'm kind of, I've said it a bunch of times in various episodes. I don't really believe in coincidences anymore. Maybe once, kind of strange, but 3 times with, pretty profound world events.
Things.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, at the end of this particular series of blood moons, it was September 18th of last year.
Okay.
And it was at this time, on September 11th, that this kid, he's 15 years old, he's not religious, he doesn't know hardly nothing about his religion because he's very secular, but and I'm telling you what he says, okay?
Sure.
Is that he died. He died for like 15 minutes. He was like clinically dead or something. And then during that time, he said that he left his body. He says he looked down and he didn't know if who was the real him, the one in the body or him, but he started leaving the earth and he saw the earth. Eventually he saw the earth and he says he was taken to heaven and he saw people there and everything. He says he instantly learned so many things. He says just like that. He was only gone for like 15 minutes, but he says he learned some of the rabbis who have interviewed him since then, including the rabbi right there, his name is Lovey, are saying that people who study the Torah for 70 years don't have that knowledge that he has.
He does.
But some of the things he said, the reason that it got my interest is because we talked about it on this program a few
Right, yeah,
months ago.
we just got done doing a couple of end times
Biblical prophecy.
prophecies, yeah.
Well, he's saying exactly, if you watch the first program, the second program we did together,
program we did was
specifically about Iran and Russia coming into
Syria,
to attack the Holy Land, is what it says in Ezekiel
afterwards,
38 and 39. Well, this kid is saying that that's what he got when he was up there, is that a great war is going to happen. And he says there's going to be an event that sparks. He says right now those countries are there fighting each other. But he says there's going to be an event that changes it, and they're going to turn against Jerusalem. And he says, okay, I'm just saying what he's saying. He says it's going to be in the next few months. I mean, you can take it or leave it, but this thing has gone viral in Israel. In Israel, this is hundreds of thousands of views on Facebook. They even asked them to take it down because it became so controversial.
Oh, wow.
But there's actual very respected rabbis in Israel, including this one. His name's Lovey, like I said, who are saying this is legit, and So anyway, the guy's name, if you want to look it up on YouTube, the kid's name is Natan, Natan, which is like Hebrew for Nathan.
Okay.
A vision of Natan, who died and saw heaven. Just listen to what he says. I don't agree with everything that he said, but he says something, which for the Christians is very interesting. He says that the rabbi asked him. He says, "Did you find out who the Messiah is?" And he says, I can't say the identity of the Messiah, but I can tell you characteristics of the Messiah. He says one thing is he's alive. Another thing,
right now walking the earth.
I don't know that it's necessarily walking the earth, but he said he's alive.
Okay.
And he said that he is sinless. He never committed any sins. And he says he's going to reveal himself to Israel. And he says when it's revealed who he is, everybody's going to say, "You were the Messiah." It was like everybody's going to be surprised. Like it's something that everybody knows already.
Okay.
And so this is what he said. So anyway,
All
I
right,
encourage you to
well,
go watch it on YouTube. It's
in
very
stand-up comedy terms, we're getting the light. So it is time to adjourn for the day. Steve, it's always a pleasure having you.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure to be with you.
And so, we'll see how the next few months turn out.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, reference books, Book of Enoch, and of course, some of the finer points from the New and Old Testament of the Holy Bible that we've been talking about today. So look it up, and it's actually turning out to be pretty historical in my opinion. So until next time, in the meantime, wherever you're going, get there safe, you guys. Take care.